Imagine a single night so terrifying, so full of fear and betrayal, that it destroyed the most powerful man in revolutionary France. A man who once controlled life and death with a signature, suddenly hunted, abandoned, bleeding, and begging for mercy he had never shown to anyone else. This is the unbelievable final chapter of Maximilien Robespierre, the man who shaped the French Revolution with his voice, ruled it with terror, and ultimately died by the very machine he had defended. But what happened in those final hours? Why did the man who seemed untouchable suddenly fall from the height of power to the floor of a filthy room, jaw shattered, praying he wouldn't be dragged to the guillotine? Today we uncover the chilling truth behind the downfall, betrayal, and horrific last days of the man once known as the Incorruptible. Maximilien Robespierre didn't start as a monster. Many forget that he began as an idealistic lawyer who dreamed of justice, equality, and rights for ordinary people. In the early days of the French Revolution, he was respected for his honesty and feared for his sharp tongue. He spoke with such passion that crowds would gather just to hear him. He wanted to end the power of the monarchy, protect the poor, and build a nation based on fairness. At first, he refused violence. He believed the law should guide the revolution, not blood. But as France descended into chaos, his beliefs began to twist. Enemies appeared everywhere: royalists, foreign armies, traitors inside the government. At least, that's what he was convinced of. Fear changed him. Power consumed him. And soon the man who once defended human rights became the architect of the Reign of Terror, a period where thousands were executed in the name of saving the revolution. As internal and external threats grew, Robespierre took command of the Committee of Public Safety, essentially the most powerful body in France at the time. Under his leadership, the guillotine became the symbol of the nation. Anyone who questioned the revolution risked being labeled an enemy. Some were guilty, many were innocent. Every day, carts rolled through the streets, carrying prisoners to their deaths. The smell of blood became so common that citizens learned to ignore it. Robespierre believed he was protecting France from collapse. He believed terror was necessary. In his own words, terror is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. But power built on fear never lasts. And the more Robespierre tightened his grip, the more enemies he made. Even his closest allies felt threatened. They began to whisper, they began to plot. And Robespierre, so used to controlling others, could not see the danger closing in around him. By the summer of 1794, the streets of Paris were exhausted. The terror had lasted too long, taken too many lives, and created too much fear. Inside the revolutionary government itself, people began to turn against Robespierre. They wondered, if he could send kings, nobles, and common farmers to their deaths, what stopped him from killing them next? His speeches became harsher, darker, filled with accusations. And every time he stood before the National Convention and announced that new traitors were discovered, politicians trembled, because no one knew who he meant. He refused to provide names. He let suspicion poison the air. People began to realize something terrifying. Robespierre was no longer protecting the revolution, he was controlling it with fear. And they knew they had only two choices: destroy him, or be destroyed by him. On the morning of July 26, 1794, Robespierre delivered one of the most chilling speeches of his life. He spoke of corruption everywhere, of plots, of traitors among the very men listening to him. His voice echoed through the chamber. His eyes scanned their faces, but he refused to name who the traitors were. That was the moment everyone realized how dangerous he had become. His words sounded like a death sentence hanging over the entire assembly. Panic spread. Men who had worked with him, who had supported him, suddenly felt their own lives slipping away. So in the shadows of that same night, they made a decision. If Robespierre would not give them names, they would give him a fate. And so began the plot to remove the most feared man in France. The next day, as Robespierre walked into the National Convention, he expected applause, or at least respectful silence. Instead, he walked into a storm. One politician after another stood up and shouted against him. They called him a tyrant. They accused him of trying to become a dictator. They demanded his arrest. Robespierre tried to speak, but every time he opened his mouth, someone shouted him down. The man whose voice once ruled France suddenly could not be heard. He looked around desperately for allies, but no one defended him. Even those who once admired him remained silent. In a moment almost too dramatic to believe, the convention voted to arrest him and his closest supporters. Robespierre the Incorruptible was no longer feared. He was cornered, and the people who once trembled before him finally had the courage to fight back. But Robespierre was not ready to surrender his power. As soldiers escorted him out, his followers sprang into action. Members of the Paris Commune, still loyal to him, declared the convention's orders illegal. They sent their own forces to free him. By nightfall, the city became a battlefield of confused loyalties. Loyalists carried Robespierre to the Hôtel de Ville, where he planned to rally support and reclaim authority. The building was crowded with supporters, soldiers, and desperate men with nothing left to lose. They lit candles, whispered plans, and waited for the uprising to begin. But something crucial never happened. The citizens of Paris, once easily stirred by speeches and passion, did not rise for him. They stayed home. They watched. And for the first time, the voice of Robespierre did not reach them. Inside the Hôtel de Ville, tension grew with every passing minute. Robespierre and his supporters sent messages, urging their allies to join them. But the National Convention acted quickly. They declared Robespierre an outlaw, meaning any citizen could legally kill him on the spot. Soldiers loyal to the convention marched toward the Hôtel de Ville. As the sound of boots and weapons echoed through the streets, panic filled the building. Robespierre's allies begged him to make a decision, fight or flee. But the man who once commanded nations now hesitated. Moments slipped away, and soon all exits were blocked. The fall of Robespierre was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. What happened next is one of the most haunting scenes in the French Revolution. As convention forces stormed the Hôtel de Ville, chaos broke out. Screams filled the hallways, doors shattered, men jumped from windows, and in the middle of it all stood Maximilien Robespierre. Accounts differ on what exactly happened. Some say he tried to shoot himself to avoid capture. Others claim a soldier fired at him, but what everyone agrees on is the image. Robespierre lying on the floor, jaw shattered, bleeding heavily, unable to speak. The man known for the power of his voice was suddenly silent. Soldiers dragged him and his companions out of the building. Their rebellion had collapsed, and now they were nothing more than criminals awaiting judgment. Throughout the night, Robespierre lay in agony. His face covered in blood, his breathing ragged, his mind sinking into confusion. He was taken to the Committee of Public Safety, the same building where he had once ordered the deaths of so many. But now he lay on a table like an injured animal. Doctors tried to stop the bleeding. Others simply stared at him, shocked. Some felt pity. Others felt justice was finally being served. But Robespierre could not answer them. The broken jaw left him unable to speak, and even if he could, no one was willing to listen. His final hours were marked by silence, pain, and the crushing realization that everything he had built was falling apart. At dawn on July 28th, Robespierre was loaded into a cart, just as his victims had been. Crowds gathered. Some cursed him, some cheered. Others watched quietly, unable to believe that the man who once controlled the fate of France now sat hunched and broken. Blood stained the bandage wrapped around his jaw. Every bump in the road sent waves of pain through his body. Witnesses say he tried to hold himself upright, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of fear. But the truth was clear. The most powerful man in France was being delivered to his execution like any common criminal. When the cart reached the Place de la Révolution, the same square where King Louis XVI had been executed, the atmosphere was electric. The guillotine towered over the crowd, a grim symbol of the terror Robespierre had helped create. He was dragged up the steps. Some say his eyes scanned the crowd, searching for mercy. Others say he looked resigned, knowing this was the end he had brought upon himself. The executioner tore the bandage from his shattered jaw, causing him to scream in unbearable agony. It was the only sound he made. Moments later, the blade fell, and with that, the reign of terror finally ended. Robespierre's death marked a turning point in France. The guillotine slowed. People who had lived in fear began to breathe again. Politicians who once hid in the shadows now stepped into the light. And history began to reshape the image of Robespierre, some calling him a hero who lost his way, others calling him a tyrant consumed by power. But one truth remains: his final days were a chilling reflection of the world he helped create. A world where suspicion ruled, fear dominated, and no one, not even its architect, was safe from the blade. Today, Robespierre remains one of the most debated figures in history. Was he a visionary who tried to save France, or a dictator who drowned it in blood? His rise and fall remind us how quickly power can twist ideals, how easily justice can become terror, and how even the most feared man can collapse in a single night. His story is a warning, one carved into history by the sound of a falling guillotine,